Welcome to Talk Advocacy to Me, the podcast that dives deep into the world of customer advocacy and loyalty. I'm your host, Liz Richardson, and I'm joined by my dynamic co-host, Deena Zenyk. We're the co-founders of Captivate Collective, and we're here to spark your curiosity and fuel your passion for all things customer advocacy. Each episode, we tackle hot and pressing customer engagement topics for the advocurious to the seasoned pro. So let's dive in and talk advocacy. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Talk Advocacy to Me, where we talk about one great question in the field of customer marketing and advocacy with experts from the field. I am Liz Richardson. I am the co-founder of Captivate Collective, and my fellow host, as always, here is Deena Zenyk, who is also the other co-founder of Captivate Collective. And we just love having discussions related to the field of customer engagement and advocacy. Today, we have our guest, Irwin Hipsman, and we have known Irwin for a very long time, but he has had lots of varying experience and roles in this field. And right now, Irwin, you are the founder of 4 Customer Marketing Practices, and we're so excited to hear a little bit about that. And you were formerly the director of customer marketing at Forrester, which is how many people may still know you today, as you were actively involved in helping define, shape, and report on the field of customer advocacy. So we are so excited to have you here and just say hello.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Me too. We've known each other since we were in Fluida's second customer way back. I've been to a bunch of Advo camps, and you know, I saw you all at XCon in the fall, and I'm just so impressed at what you've been able to build. As somebody who's just starting off from scratch, I'm just amazed at how you've done what you've done. So this is a wonderful opportunity to chat.
Well, it's lovely to reconnect. And you're right. I guess we've all three been in this field for a very long time, probably longer than we like to admit.
Probably
but that means we've seen it all. We've seen it from the beginning, and it's always wonderful to talk to someone who's been there from kind of the origination of, let's say, what we call modern customer advocacy, or the founding of the advocate marketing practice, all the way to where we are today. And a lot has changed for sure. And I think that could bring us to our topic, which I failed to even announce, which is terrible hostess duties. Terrible, just terrible. So our question today is, why should customer marketers care about customer database health? I don't think this is going to take a lot of convincing for people to believe that they need to care about customer database health, because I think as practitioners, we have all been in these situations where we have gotten stuck because of database health, but that's often something we don't necessarily control either. So I think that this will be a really interesting talk. So I want to make sure that we really get into some of the nitty gritty of what are the challenges of not having database health, and then what can we do about it, right? All right. So when we talk about customer advocate database cleanliness, Irwin, I want to make sure that we kind of define what that means for most people. I know it might be self-explanatory, but there might be some people out there who want to understand what that might mean.
No, super important question. So there are 2 databases I think about. One is the larger customer contact database. So a company typically has 10 people in their database per account. So if you've got 500 accounts, you've got 5,000 names of customers, and some of them will be very active, some of them inactive, whatever. Then there's the customer advocate database, which is more in the control of customer marketing. The argument that I make is that customer marketing, customer advocates should start paying attention to the larger customer contact database. But until you get your own customer advocacy database in order, it's really hard to do. And the key data points, this is sort of level 1. This is not integration with utilization or things like that. It's, do you have the person's right employer? So 20% of people leave their company every year. So there's a good chance, and the research that I've done and the clients I've worked on, when I work on a database, about 20% of those people are no longer at their company. So that really impacts you wonder why advocates aren't active. They're not there anymore. Second is, what's their title? Because when you first met them, they may have been a manager or director, and now they're a VP, but nobody knows that across the organization. You know it, but nobody else knows it, and nobody spends the time going into CRM and updating people's titles. And the third is location. Over the past 5 years between the pandemic and in general, people move. You can't assume they're near headquarters, and you can't assume that they're still where they were when you first met them. So if you're trying to do user group meetings, or you have an event in a city and you want to invite your advocates, you want to know, are they in that city, or no, they moved a few years ago. So those are the three core pieces of data, and those are all very public. You could go into LinkedIn manually. It's really dreary work. I've done thousands of people. I've gone to LinkedIn. It is not fun work, but you could go into LinkedIn and update those three pieces of data instantly. Now, the problem is you've got to then put it into a spreadsheet and then upload it into the CRM system. And then, 2 to 3% of your data changes on a monthly basis. So you have to do that over and over and over again. So it doesn't scale, but it can be done.
I want to even just take a step back from here, and because you mentioned your advocate database, but not so long ago, there wasn't necessarily this idea of I own and have my own advocate database. And what's interesting is, as Captivate's doing research on vendor technology, when we talk about technology that's really pivotal for customer marketing and advocacy, this idea now of my advocate database is very, very important. And so I think that we've even had customers we've worked with in the past, maybe at a really big organization, and their main challenge was they didn't have an advocate database, and they were reliant on whoever controlled or owned the actual CRM system or the organization, and that was causing huge blockers. I know, Deena, you were helping with one of these clients. Talk to us a little about the challenges of that and the decision why they decided it was so important to have their own database.
Yeah, I mean, even just to jump in, whenever we have conversations around data cleanliness, databases, knowing who your advocates are, it immediately brings to mind for me going on site many years ago to a client whose name is really synonymous with the Bay Area. And I was consulting with them, and one of the first questions was around, who would you have on your list of advocates? And they said, hey, look, even though it's kind of our databases and CRMs are kind of our jam, we can't rely on our data here. I was like, wow, that is really eye-opening, the importance of data cleanliness and data maintenance. I mean, this is not a new problem. But as you said, Liz, what is new is that ownership and who's responsible for the maintenance of the big C CRM and maybe the small c, the list of engaged advocates, and how are those two integrated and how do they play off of each other. One other comment I just wanted to make sure to drop in here to some of what you just described there, Irwin. It wasn't too long ago that customer advocacy practitioners were of the mindset that unless your customer was actually a current customer, so you said 20% of people leave their jobs every year, then they couldn't really be an advocate for your company because they had left and gone on to a company that was no longer using your products. I always thought that was a little short-sighted because, of course, if you are an advocate, then you're an advocate for the company and the products and the use cases that have helped make you successful. That doesn't just evaporate when you leave to go to a job that's not using that tool or that vendor. So again, just underscores how important it is to not just lose track of people when they change jobs, but to really look at that as a big opportunity
that was
for your business.
The last project I did at Forrester before I left was, we call it repeat sales by former customer contact, alumni program. So we would identify those people who left their company. And there are a few ways of doing that, mainly manual, but there are some ways to automate that process. Then, hand that lead off to the BDR team. They know how to deal with leads. And there were two streams. There are people who left and had not landed, and we nurtured them one way. For example, why don't you come to our event? Here's 50% off, or here's a free ticket to our event, or here's some content, whatever it might be. And then those people who left and landed, and if they landed at a ICP, ideal customer profile, then they went through the lead process. Again, the messaging has to be different. You don't want to message somebody who used your product like their prospect never heard about you. But those are the sort of programs that once you have a clean database, you can start initiating. And I'm frankly shocked that very few companies do that. They just wait. They'll call us up when they're ready to buy. It's like you spend all this time marketing people who are never going to buy, and you're waiting for the people who will buy to give you a call. It just seems counterintuitive to me.
I love that, and we're talking about some of the value here, so we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. But let's take a step back and talk about this idea of data cleanliness specifically for customer programs, customer engagement programs. So again, this may seem pretty, standard for a lot of people, but it's good for us to take a step back and say, what is the value of storing and understanding your customer data when it comes to customer engagement programs? And so we talked about following advocates, so having that data being very important in that area. But then also, let's talk about some ideas around segmentation, relevance, all of that.
Right. So by having particularly titles, that enables you to start getting into segmentation. Then if most companies will have some utilization data that the customer advocacy manager has access to. The two key pieces of data that I think about when it comes to engagement, utilization, are when did that person first appear? So when did they join? When did they get access? And when was the last time they used the product? So if they, if you first saw them 3 years ago and they've never logged into your product, they're probably not a candidate to being an advocate. And then you can start looking at engagement. Do they attend webinars? Have they registered, for user groups? Have they downloaded material? And the third thing, and to me, what's sort of the most exciting that I've sort of uncovered recently is how many followers, LinkedIn followers, does an advocate have. In some of the work I've done, for Captivate and cleaning up your database, I found that I'm looking at it right now. I found that 62% of your contacts had more than 1,000 followers, and 21% had more than 2,500 followers. Some research I would love to do is correlate the number of followers your advocates have versus the number of followers other people in your database have. My hypothesis is that one of the ways to identify those hidden advocates is purely by the number of followers they have. If somebody has 2,500 followers, it means they're very active. They're thinking about the outside world, and they could be, but they've never raised their hand with you, or nobody's ever identified them. That to me would be top of funnel to identify potential advocates. Those are reasons why you want to have, a clean database. You want to, help identify advocates. You want to know, how engaged they are with your product and how engaged they are with you as a company.
Irwin, that's so interesting. It's like, for so many years we've said that your persona, the persona documentation that your organization has, it's good to know, but for advocacy, it really is what is the persona of your ideal advocate, or personas, because you're not even just talking about one type of advocate, but if you had to put together persona documentations for advocates, the factors that you'd be looking at in that persona documentation would be different. You're not just looking at title, location, et cetera, but how many LinkedIn followers? If someone has a lot of LinkedIn followers, could you then say that maybe their kind of advocacy pathway with you is more around professional brand building and getting those people on a pedestal publicly? That is super interesting, Irwin. Thank you for that little kind of thought, that seed.
And I think we know from a customer champion database there's just so many different pieces of data that could be extremely helpful for then designing and operating your different customer programs. When we are looking at data for audiences and determining who's the right audience, it's looking beyond, like you said, it's now product usage. It's just so huge. Are we tracking product usage? Do we know where they are on their journey? Is that something that we have access to? Do we collect and store their interests, their desires, their personal, professional goals and whatnot? So this could get really big as we talk about that. But as far as using data for customer engagement profiling and then pursuit, I think that we're becoming a whole lot more savvy and looking to store and leverage more and more data to personalize those experiences, whether it's inviting them into a program or whether it's asking them to collaborate in some way with the organization. These tools, as these processes become more refined, we have access to so much data. And so now the challenge really for a lot of customer marketers is they understand the value of what that data can bring in the form of relevance and specificity, reaching out at the right time to the right person in the right channel. But getting a hold of that data and then understanding if that data is reliable is really becoming a part of the challenge, especially since a lot of customer marketers are not people who would typically be touching a lot of different types of data, understand a lot about data cleanliness, understand a lot about connecting systems to feed data into different systems. So I think that's become an extra challenge to the role of a customer marketer, is having some proficiency or at least a level of understanding when it comes to data sources and then using and leveraging that data for your work in customer marketing.
Yeah, and within an organization, it's really important to start making friends with demand gen, marketing ops, rev ops, those sort of people. And, by basically going to them and say, look, I've just spent, a month, or I've just paid somebody, whatever, to clean up my customer, my advocacy database. You know what? I found some things here that may impact our customer contact database. That's not really my world. It's probably not the world of anybody's world, but let me raise that up because this is what I've learned. I've done some hard work and I've earned the right to sort of bring up what I've seen around the larger customer contact database. But the important thing is now you're starting a dialogue with them around databases and how they function and how you keep them clean and what, you could potentially even ask for a new field. Like, what I would really love, and we just talked about this, Deena, I would love a field that has people's LinkedIn URL. Because we don't have that field in our CRM. That would be so helpful to me. And now that you've done some hard work, you're able to earn the right to ask for those things. I'm sure he was going to have a great example
of a field that you might ask. And I think that's part of the challenge, just going back to that idea of,
did we just freeze or?
Yeah, we lost you for a little bit there, Irwin, and you were just about to say, "Hey, we talked about asking, maybe need to ask for a field on," and then you left us on pins and needles.
Sorry about that. So what I was saying was that if you do the hard work of cleaning up your advocate database, really understanding it, seeing what the flaws are, what the weaknesses are, what you do well. Then you've earned the right to go to either the CRM team or the marketing ops team or the rev ops team and say, look, I've just done some hard work. Here's some things I've noticed around our database. For example, we would love to have a field for a LinkedIn URL, but we don't have it. It would be so helpful to us. And it would also be helpful for the larger customer contact database. But, now you've got a dialogue with them. You're understanding what their limitations are. They'll say, well, that's great, but it's going to take me 6 months to do. It's like, okay, now I know that there's a 6-month lead to get things done, but let's put it on the list now because, in 6 months from now, we can use it as well. And I can start collecting that. And when you add that field, I'll be ready for you. But to me, that's the key thing, is for people in the customer advocacy side of the house who are more one-to-one relationships, beginning to start spending more and more time with the life cycle marketing side of the house, demand gen side of the house, just to understand the language and the limitations that they have.
It's so interesting to me because even as we see the evolution toward maybe tools that are owned and managed by customer marketing and advocacy, because of what you just described, which is okay, I'm going to, if I want to make any changes to the data that I'm storing and collecting, I'm going to have to get in a queue, and I have no control over how that platform is set up and what data is stored. So maybe we do see some tools now where people are kind of housing their master list of champions. And I mean, that's like a reference tool or an advocacy tool of some kind. Those
Sure.
have been around. But what's so interesting to me is you still have the same problems to some degree of a larger CRM system. The data still gets dirty, and it still becomes really hard to keep up with, and it becomes really unreliable. I think it's a great challenge, and everyone can and knows that. But we've come to some really hard stops in projects where it's like, okay, we're going to go out and we're going to launch this program, and we're going to invite this segment. This is our ideal membership profile, and then the customer is like, don't know how we're going to access that. We don't trust the data, or we don't have access to that data. And so there's almost like oh, well, what do we do? And then we have to get really creative in how we identify those people and invite them into
and with these advocacy platforms, customer advocacy owns it. You can go in there and clean it up yourself. It doesn't depend on someone else. Now, again, it's drudge work, it's hard work, it's never up to date. But it's not like you have, like if you want to integrate data from your platform into CRM, you can't do that on your own. That's going to take, that could take up to a year to get done because, a million variables. But if you have your own customer advocacy platform and you've got your list of 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people, you can, you don't need anyone else's permission to clean it up. Now, whether you do it yourself or you outsource it or, whatever, you own that and you can update it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's the benefit of having your own tool is you control it.
Well, Irwin, you've looked at a lot of advocacy or champion databases. What are some of the challenges that you run into when it comes to data cleanliness, specifically for that segment of a customer audience?
Yeah, so what I found is that generally, when you look at those three core pieces of data, those are the ones that are you don't have to ask the customer, where do you live, what's your title, who do you work for? That you can get off of LinkedIn, because anytime I've sent an email out to customers and say, hey, it's spring cleaning, we're going to update our database. Here's what we have about you. You get about a 1% return on that. So it's not worth your time to ask unless you've done all the work and there's still 5% of the people that you haven't heard from. Those are the people you may want to ask, but you don't want to ask people to do what they expect of you. They expect that you know where they're employed, their title, and their location. So for you to ask them to do that, it's like, well, why are they asking me things that they should know about me already? So once you've cleaned them up, what I found is between 60 and 80% of that data is incorrect. And so it's the drudge work of going through there to get their locations, titles, and where they're located. And to me, the goal has always been about 95%. If I can have it up to 95%. Now, clearly, if you start segmenting your advocates, you've got your high-profile advocates. That's probably should be 100% accurate. You've got your less active advocates. Probably 90%. But you're talking those. If they're an advocate of yours, the data should be about 90%. It should be in the high 90s, correct, as opposed to the mid 70s. Because then you can start doing what we talked about, the segmentation, the personalization, things like that. So it's not a huge delta, but the problem is that the few things we know is that the database decays 2% per month, so the delta just gets bigger and bigger. So is it an annual cleanup? Is it a twice a year cleanup? It's probably not a monthly cleanup. There's an impact to there's an economic impact. If you don't know that somebody's left, churn begins to, there's potential for churn. If someone's, an advocate, there's a good chance they're involved somehow in the purchase and the renewal. So if they've churned, if they've left, then you've got a potential churn problem. And when I see some of the data out there by others, bad data is sort of the number 2 challenge of any customer campaign. And, you just talked about that. And, probably, and other data I've seen is the third biggest buying signal for a new purchase is were they a past customer. So there's a lot of reasons to make sure that database is correct, that you can call on.
All right, so let's get into some of the actual, okay, so
What are you doing?
Hopefully. Maybe I just have tracking in my CRM, Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever that may be. Maybe I have my own customer advocate database. So, and I'm acknowledging that there's a lot of messiness. Nobody's looked at that for a while. I don't know how old or decayed it is at this point. How should people, what are
Sure.
some good methodologies for getting started, Irwin?
Yeah. So step one would be to take 10%. Let's say you've got 1,000 advocates, maybe 20%. I would take 20% at random. Uh, you know, maybe do some segmentation. Very active versus not so active. But let's just say take 20% at random, and take a day and go into or ask different people in your team to let's go into LinkedIn and let's see what we have, and that will be your first sense of how bad is the problem. So, we've got 10% of the people are no longer at their company. That's not great, but okay, we know that. 20% of them we don't have the right location, and 30% of them we don't have the right title. Oh, we've now, and you could then extrapolate that that's probably true of everybody. And then you have to assess the risk of that. Is that acceptable? If I went to my CMO and said, we don't have, 10% of our, we believe that in our advocate database, 10% of the people are gone, 20% of the people we don't have the right locations, and 30% of them we don't have the right title. Is that acceptable? And most CMOs would say, wait a second, these are our advocates. That's crazy. Why don't we know, that should be 95%. Or they may say, yeah, that's acceptable because I want you to do something else. I need you to get us Gartner customer choice is the most important thing I need. So don't worry about the health of the database. But at least you now know what its status is. Now, assuming that everyone agrees that's not acceptable, how do you go about cleaning it up? One way is, let's just grind through LinkedIn and just keep on going through. The problem with that is that you'll probably be able to, there are some people who are easy to find, then there are some people who are really hard to find on LinkedIn. You have maiden names, you have, the company has changed the name. So they get really surprisingly hard to find. You'd be amazed. And then let's say you've done that manually, and now every 6 months you have to do that again and again. So one thing I strongly recommend is that you also capture people's LinkedIn profile. And then add that as a field somewhere, even if it has to be a spreadsheet, because the CRM team won't give you the field. If you have your own customer advocacy platform, you can easily add that field. So then when it's time to clean up, at least, you don't have to search for them. You know what their URL is, and you can then update that. Again, that's a lot of work. I'd rather, if I was a customer advocacy person, I'd rather, outsource that. I'd rather spend my time, doing one-to-one relationship things, working on the KPIs. It'll never be a KPI to clean up the database. The KPI will be we need 10 use cases, we need 20 of these, 40 of these, whatever it is. So this is sort of a side job that that really is foundational, because if you don't have the right information, it gets that much harder to do your job.
Well, I think this would be a good place. Like when you did a little bit of database cleanliness for us. We're a small company, so you kind of just did a bunch of our contacts, which is thank you so much. That's super helpful. Like, what did you? We knew our data was dirty, so I'm just going to put that out there to everyone. We knew our data was dirty, but we're a very small, lean team, and so we hadn't had a lot of time to clean that up. So I know that you kind of found some of the typical industry standards of how dirty the data was, and you can share that. That's totally fine.
Yeah, I mean, these weren't advocates per se. They're more your customers and your contacts. But I think there's a direct correlation between the two. And I was able to find 95% of them, 80% of them through technology, and 15% through grinding through LinkedIn. But that's just the way it is. You're never going to find everybody with any technology. The 27% of them had left their company or were searching. So by searching, it means that they say open to work, or on LinkedIn it says they're no longer at that company. So but they're either at a new company or they're searching. But from your perspective, potential clients down the road or potential advocates, on the advocacy side. What I found most interesting was that you had 57% of the people, you had their titles, because maybe they filled out a form, and they gave you a title, and I was able to identify 92% of them. So you now know 92% of their title, the up-to-date titles, not when you first met them. I didn't look at how many of them changed, because that's tricky, because sometimes titles change very subtly. So you can't assume that someone was a manager of customer experience, now they're a manager of customer experience and customer success. That's not a title change, but if you were to look at the spreadsheet, you say, oh, that was a change. So, but you now know 92% of their titles. And what jumped out at me is you had 16% of their locations, because you never asked. And now you're starting to do events around the world. I know you do a London event, and I know you want to do more events. Now you know where 96% of the people are located. So you can go over there and say, well, where should we do our next? I mean, imagine field marketing would love this sort of data to be able to trust it. So you can say, well, let's see where we have the most customers. Oh my God, Chicago is a large cohort. We didn't realize that. We always thought it was New York and San Francisco. Let's do an event in Chicago. And we can invite people in Chicago because we know, where they're located. Nothing is worse than, I've worked for a Swiss company, so I got invited to events in London, even though I lived in Boston, because that's where they had their European events. And they had an event in Boston that they never invited me to because they thought I was in Europe. So there's nothing worse than getting invited to an event that you just can't go to, and there's a similar event just right around the corner from you. It's sort of embarrassing, actually.
Yeah, I think that geolocation data is just something, as we continue to grow, right? Where we're like, oh my gosh, this is actually data we really need to start capturing.
And then, and jumped out from a conversation when we talked with Deena about LinkedIn, you had 62% of your contacts with more than 1,000 followers. Someone has more than 1,000 followers. That's a pretty heavy user of LinkedIn, I would say. Some of them, it's 10,000, and now you know all that. We gave you all that information, and 21% of them had more than 2,500 followers. So you know who are your active people when it comes to not just within their company, but to the outside world.
Yeah, Deena, I see so many possibilities of what to do with that data. What's popping out to you?
Well, I mean, I think Irwin mentioned it there, like anything where you're planning to go somewhere. And we have some road shows coming up this year in our travel schedule. And like you used to be able to just say like, okay, the Bay, New York,
Right.
Boston. But after COVID, man, like people are here, there, and everywhere. And we have looked, but I definitely, I want to have another look now that you've gone through this exercise, Irwin, because we know that we have people in like what we would think are unusual pockets, especially in the US, people who moved out of these big cities and into smaller locales during COVID. That's really important and useful information from a business perspective. But can I also just say one of the other ways this type of information is useful is also just for like gifting. And
Sure.
we like to do a lot of gifting. A lot of customer advocacy professionals do a lot of gifting, and knowing where people are located factors heavily into that, as I know Alicia, our marketing manager, can attest to. So that's good information as well. I'm really excited to look at your findings in a little more detail, Irwin.
Yeah, and from a cost and time perspective to do this work, because there's lost opportunity if you're spending a day spending time on LinkedIn. My experience, just because I do this all the time, is it probably takes on average about 5 to 10 minutes per contact to find them, to copy and paste their title into the spreadsheet, all that sort of stuff. It's about 5 to 10 minutes, and so if you were to associate a cost, it's probably about $5 a name, $7 a name to do it yourself. When we use data processors, they obviously can do it very quickly, but we're talking pennies per name. The project I did for you is probably 20, 30 cents a name to do that, and virtually no time, except for the 10% you can't find, then you've got to grind through it. So from a scaling perspective, manual is really tough. But if you use technology out there, then it gets it's doable because they have AI in it, et cetera, et cetera. The challenge with the technology is that most of them This is going to be a little bit of a shameless plug. Most of them want 1-year contracts, and it's really hard to justify for my advocate database. I need to do a 1-year contract for my 2,000 to 3,000, 5,000, whatever names. If your company has some of these tools, you should find out. Talk to demand gen people. I won't mention names, but if they have sort of the classic sort of prospect finding contact databases, those are woefully out of date. I mean, I looked at one. I want to see, where do they have me at? They had me at 3 companies ago still, where I was 5 years ago. So those databases, sort of the more classic legacy databases, are very, very, just aren't quick enough. If you want to know if somebody left, you're going to find out a year later. And there's some newer technology out there to do that, but they want 1-year contracts, and that's a big lift to go through procurement, et cetera, et cetera. When I work with clients, it's a one-off. So if you just want to do it one time and that's all, and you never want to talk again, that's fine. If you want to do a one-off and then, once a year clean it up, that's okay as well. So that's how you get down to pennies per name, is you just do as a one-off, and you're not licensing technology, because that can be really hard within an organization to bring technology in.
So as we run short on time here, I want to make sure that we get to this idea. So let's say you have done some work on your database, like you did that initial cleanliness. Irwin, what are some tips then for keeping the data clean on an ongoing basis?
There's 2. One is sort of the manual. I think you could go to your CSMs, your account managers, the people who work day to day with the clients, say, look, guys, we just cleaned up the database. We either spent all this time or money to, we cleaned it up. We've done the hard work. It's not 99%, but it's 95% accurate. As you hear from clients and talk to them and you hear a change, like, oh, I didn't know you just moved, or, oh, you've got a new title, or you've left your company. When you hear those signals, go into your CRM system and, update it, because, we're not asking you, I think the mistake a lot of people do, and I've made it 100 times, you go to CSM and say, hey, can you clean up your just for your contacts, can you clean up the database? It's like, I don't have the time to look at 200 people. But if I were to say to them, I just cleaned up your database for you, as there are changes, let us know. Then the next thing is, as you're doing email sends and you get bounce backs, somebody should be looking at it and say, okay, what's the reason for the bounce back? Odds are pretty high that they no longer work at the company. So, you can go to the LinkedIn profile and you can see, is there being change? Or you can reach out to them. The CSM can reach out to them because they have a relationship with them. So that's where, there's still that ongoing manual work, but, it's a lot easier. And then I would say, in your case, I'd probably say once a year, you should do a complete refresh, because manual will only get you so far. Manual will get you 50% of the changes.
And I know you gave us a really good tip, which is, a lot of this stuff we hadn't been asking for, let's just be honest, because we really weren't thinking like, oh, for data cleanliness, let's make sure we ask for people's LinkedIn on all of our HubSpot forms. But that's a brilliant suggestion, because if people are willing to share that, the next time we do need to update, we know exactly where to find them. It's like you said, Irwin, we're not like hunting for a needle in a haystack, because we're not exactly sure how these people go by on LinkedIn, and they're not readily accessible. So small changes like that can be, I think, really, really helpful in just getting a hold of where are your customers and where can you follow your customers ongoing. And
then work on, nurture campaigns as people leave. You may want to communicate, you may want to segment to slightly different, type of messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. This has been so insightful, very, very helpful. I mean, it's kind of a big topic that you could talk about a lot more. And again, it's almost like that thing we're starting to have to think more about that maybe we weren't challenged to think about 5 to 10 years ago. I know, Irwin, that you're trying to do a lot of promotion of awareness in the space around advocate cleanliness. And I think you have some research that you're doing. Just take 30 seconds to sign us off telling us about that research.
Yeah, the research that I'm doing is, coming from Forrester, I believe in the power of original research. And so I've got a 20-question survey that I'm getting ready to put out to the customer marketing, customer advocacy community, asking about the health of the database. People may not be able to answer every question. That's fine. And, the goal is to basically now have some numbers, some data that says, hey, this is what's going on out there. And for anybody who participates in it, I'm happy to do a 1-hour free workshop. Basically, some of the things we talked about here today, but going much deeper for anyone who fills that out. It's not a lead gen opportunity, so you can be anonymous if you want to, because I'm not going to use that data to then reach out to you and say, oh, I see you haven't cleaned up your database in 5 years, talk to us. So you can be anonymous. I want the data. And then the next research project I want to do that we touched upon just briefly was, is there a correlation between advocates and LinkedIn followers? So at some point I'm going to be looking for maybe 5 to 10 companies to really spend some time with to work on that. But I want to get this first research project done, and then we'll talk again when it's time to do the next research project. And hopefully when we have some data, we'll publish it through Captivate Collective.
Oh, awesome. We love it. We're all about research and data, and we'd be happy to get our hands on that because it's very interesting to know these things. Irwin, if you're interested in talking to Irwin about that topic or the research that he's going to be, he is easy to find on LinkedIn because if you search Irwin Hipsman, I'm pretty sure there aren't many.
I'm the only one on the planet. My parents were into branding way before.
So please reach out to him. Yeah. Thank you so much, Irwin, for sharing about this topic, kind of a side topic. It was interesting because we haven't talked about data cleanliness before on Talk Advocacy to me. So thank you for walking us through some of those tips and practices. That's hopefully helpful for our audience. And we will, of course, continue to travel on this advocacy practice journey with you.
That's not the most glamorous topic, but it's really
it's important.
It is. Irwin. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time around. Bye.
Bye.